Hey there, it's your host, Cindy Chang, founder of Evolve Consulting Co. and the visionary behind an exciting new venture launching in 2025, making staffing accessible for companies of all sizes. Welcome back to the Fearless Entrepreneurs podcast, where we dive deep into the stories behind Canada's most inspiring brands. Together, we'll uncover how these bold entrepreneurs sparked their dreams, tackled their toughest challenges, and leaned into their fears to achieve success. I'm thrilled you're here, bold enough to embrace the hard truths and inspired to learn from their journeys. Ready to dive in? Let's go. Today, on this day that celebrates love, we're here to talk about a hard topic that doesn't get discussed enough. Unhealthy relationships, gender-based violence, and the barriers survivors face when seeking support. And we're doing it with someone who's leading real change in this space. Now, a quick warning to you before we get further into the episode. Some of the topics that we are discussing today will be tough to hear. So listen with care, discretion, and please share with someone who might need it in this time, or simply just turn it off if it's not sitting right. You choose your own adventure. Lucrezia Spagnolo, the founder of VESTA Social Innovation Technologies. She's not just an entrepreneur, she's a survivor, an advocate, and a driving force behind tech solutions that help survivors of gender-based violence access support, navigate their options, and seek justice on their own terms. Her team are making it easier for survivors to connect to social services, report anonymously if they choose, and find a sense of community. They've built platforms like VESTA Community and VESTA Campus, both designed with privacy, security, and survivor agency at their core. And their work isn't just making an impact, it's shaping the global conversation on gender-based violence and tech. The stats are astounding. Each year, over 500,000 people face gender-based violence. 80% of assailants are friends or family of the victim. 85% are willing to talk about their assault, and only 5% of people reported. Before founding VESTA, Lucrezia had a successful career in international business and finance, holding strategic roles and managed multinational teams, led high-stakes initiatives, including securing a European banking license. Despite her success in the corporate world, she felt a deep calling to use her skills for something bigger. And in 2017, she took a bold leap, leaving that world behind to build VESTA, an organization dedicated to supporting survivors of gender-based violence and driving systemic change. We're honored to have her here today with us to talk about her journey, the work VESTA is doing, and how we can all be a part of the solution. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
What an important topic, Lucrezia. Let's break it down. So it's a topic that not a lot of people talk about. Why did you build this organization? Let's start from the beginning.
Sure. It's a bit of a long story. So as you said in the intro, I always called VESTA my second career. And I had this career in financial services. I had worked abroad. My dreams, to be honest, which was to work abroad, to work in the corporate world, and to have this corporate job and climb this corporate ladder. But in around 2014, I came back to Canada, and I'm still with the organization I worked with, but I had started to chase at the seams, and I wasn't sure what I was going to do next. And as I started to realize that I wasn't sure what was coming up next, I would spend my days trying to understand the startup ecospace in Toronto. I had moved back from Europe, and I thought, I'm going to do something in fintech. I realized that the happiest time in my career was when I was working for a smaller organization, growing it to something larger. And so I thought, you know what? Let's see what the startup world is like. During the day, I'm spending my day understanding tech and what was happening in the startup world. And I honestly thought I was going to do something in fintech. But what happened was everybody kept saying, and I couldn't quite find where I fit into it. And everything I kept hearing over and over again. And honestly, I never thought I was going to be an entrepreneur. I thought, let's see what other people are building and let me help them. Since I had nearly 20 years experience at international events, I can help all these organizations that are looking to just be the next Western Union type of thing. So what was happening was during the day, I was learning all about technology, but in the evening, it was at around the time that Jean Gomeshi was in and out of the news here in Canada, Bill Cosby in the United States. Then there was a 2016 primaries, and I couldn't believe how pervasive rape culture was, that it was dismissed as locker room talk. And I realized that emotions that I had, memories that I thought were dead and buried, and I thought I had dealt with all my issues, actually came roaring to the surface. I realized that I couldn't get it out of my head. And I couldn't understand how we lived in a world where rape culture was this pervasive. And as I started doing more and more research around it, you just mentioned some of the stats. It's just the tip of the iceberg, and I couldn't let it go. And I realized I didn't care about fintech. I realized that I didn't want to help somebody realize their own dreams. I realized that wasn't part of my dream anymore. And I didn't know how or why, but I thought I've got to do something. I applied to an incubator program, which was really an ideation type program. I didn't even have the language at the time. I didn't even know what that was. Looking back, I probably applied with a run-on sentence, essentially saying that I wanted to use existing technology to eradicate rape culture. And they accepted me.
I think that anytime you go into an incubator with something as spicy as eliminate rape culture, that definitely stops people in their tracks. Thank you so much for sharing that. And to unpack that a little bit, you were going along in your journey in fintech. You knew you wanted to do something that impacted change, but seeing everything in the news was really triggering for you. So what was being brought up that made you really fired up about this topic?
The short answer is rage. I didn't even know I had that in me. I don't even think I could articulate it because it wasn't intellectual. It was pure emotion. And I couldn't understand how it was also the rise. It was the beginning when people started talking about DEI and psychological safety. And I would go into all these meetings and then we would be talking about gender equality. And I didn't even realize that looking back, I've always been a very strong supporter and realized if we're going to be starting to talk about diversity, inclusion, belonging, and we were talking about gender equality, I thought, how can we be talking about any of this if there's this incredible violence that is geared towards our genders and geared towards, at the time, the language wasn't even gender-based violence. It was really more about sexual violence. And it was like violence against women and girls. And all I can think about was, how could we possibly be talking about psychological safety if we can't talk about physical safety? And how can we be talking about equality if we're afraid for our lives?
You're right. At the core of it, our stability and our structure was broken. I remember that time too, when all that news were coming out and it was normalized speech. Oh, this happened and this person was bad because of X, Y, and Z. Oh, moving along. Nobody really got deeper into that conversation.
It was so normalized. It was so dismissed. It just rattled because I felt that people wanted to have these very superficial conversations, but they wouldn't get to the crux of the issue and the underlying issues. And that for me became very frustrating.
So for you, Lucrezia, it was more so the emotions that you had felt about this, not necessarily that you had necessarily been a survivor. This wasn't a product of your past. This was like, this is in the news and this just makes me mad. The injustice makes me mad.
It's both. So it brought back memories and it triggered a lot of memories of things and situations and experiences that I had dismissed. And I thought I had moved past them. Educated I became about gender-based violence, sexual assault, realizing that it's a spectrum. When I was younger, I thought there was really just one definition, it was rape. And one understanding that it's a continuum and a spectrum, and that there are lots of different situations that can happen. I also started to look at it from a criminal perspective as well. Even our own Canadian criminal code has 4 levels of sexual assault. It's not as clear cut. So to answer your question, it was both. It was memories, it was of situations and experiences that I had experienced, as well as what was happening in the news was triggering all that. And at first, I couldn't understand how it triggered such strong emotion in me because I had suppressed so many emotions in the past and not realized that's what was being triggered.
Something that you had mentioned that I just want to broaden a little bit is that the word rape it's thrown around a lot, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so how do we clearly define for people as we're setting the framework of this conversation, what is gender-based violence and what falls under the umbrella of rape?
Goodness, you think that would be a simple question to answer, but it's not. So
I knew it wouldn't be.
No, and I'm trying to think of something that's more of a layman. I've heard so many like academic, if you will, or even legal terms.
Yeah.
But just to keep it simple, it's any act, whether physical or verbal, that is aimed at someone in order to hurt them in some way based on their gender. And so that could be anything from inappropriate language. It could be sexual harassment. It could be sexual assault, which could be violent or non-violent. And rape also has various degrees, right? Really comes down to it is that when it comes to rape, it also comes down is there any penetration into the body? And so it has quite a variety. And I think that's what's so hard for individuals sometimes to grasp when we're talking about headlines and things that are in the news. It's not a clear cut yes, no. So some it's very clear. I think you mentioned it even in your stats. Rape and sexual assault, when it physically then involves an assault on a person and their body, it's physical. And it is motivated by sex or their gender. Now, it's not about sexual attraction at all. It's actually about power. So it has actually nothing to do with that. So it's about power imbalance. Sometimes it's so broad that sometimes it's challenging for people to really understand what it is we're talking about. It's one of those things where you know it when you see it.
Yeah. Something feels wrong, feels icky and off.
How many times have we seen things in the news? And I think there was a period of time, I can't remember what actor it was. This was a few years ago, where it was like, is it a bad date or was it an assault? There is a difference in that. And it has to do with consent. It has to do with what actually happened. And sometimes the intent isn't even involved. It's about understanding the difference between what actually is a crime against an individual versus one that isn't.
And there is probably a lot of different levels within that. And so the definition that you were describing before, that was gender-based violence. Is that right?
It is, because they've expanded the scope. In the last few years, it's really expanded because before it used to be talked about as sexual assault or sexual violence or violence against women and girls. And we've come to realize that although it impacts disproportionately women and girls, it does actually impact everybody. And when you start talking about the intersections, if you will, of marginalized or racialized individuals, those numbers skyrocket. If you actually start talking to individuals between the gender nonconforming communities, those numbers also increase. And sometimes they're looking at something as high as 1 in 2 individuals and targeted specifically because of their gender. Hence, it's gender-based violence.
So it doesn't always have to be romantic. It's just specifically targeting them based on their gender, whether it's physical, whether it's mental, whether it's emotional, whether it's verbal. It's just performing an act of violence against an individual based on their gender.
Exactly.
And that's a very broad umbrella, because then now I think about people who discriminate against transgendered people, who discriminate against gay people. The list is long.
It is.
The stats are crazy to me. 85% of the people will talk to somebody about it, but only 5% of the people report it. Now, I get that. People are like, hey, I trust you, Lucrezia, you're my friend. I feel uneasy in my relationship. But people don't necessarily report it because of that fear of exposing themselves and the shame and could this person be arrested? What are the systemic issues that are broken that prevent people from reporting gender-based violence?
My goodness, that's a huge question as well. Going into all these large questions. So one thing is that I want to mention is that actually one of the stats, it's not as well known that 85% of people disclose. The stat we hear more and more is that 95% of individuals aren't reporting. What's important about that is it gives this perception that individuals don't want to talk about it, want to come forward because there are options for reporting. So it has this, it leads to this fallacy that individuals don't want to talk about it. They just want to move away and they want to move forward and forget about it. The stat that's important, and as you mentioned, is 85% disclose. That means they tell someone, whether it's a friend, a family member, a counselor, a teacher. So 85%. What was so important before we even get to the systemic issues, right? The thing is that what happens when individuals disclose? Because if you go from 85% are talking about it, but only 5% are coming forward and taking any kind of action, what happened? So what I came to realize and really dug into the research and realized that first conversation, the first person they disclose to, they talk to, has an incredible impact on three things. It impacts how they classify what happened to them. Because if say, this happened to me and you just, that's just boys being boys. Everybody knows that guy. Never get in a room alone with him. And so you've now dismissed it. So now I'm looking at saying, okay, so maybe it wasn't what I thought it was. Told me that it didn't really matter. But if it was traumatizing for me, now I've turned it inwards because now it could impact my short-term as well as my long-term mental health because now I'm ruminating and I could have been angry at that person. But now that anger could have turned into shame. So now it could have an impact on my short-term and long-term mental health. And the third thing it impacts is whether or not someone goes forward and takes any kind of action. And that means whether they seek out support services or report it. So that is the first kind of piece that we want to talk about and that we want to tackle. The second piece, when you start talking about those systemic issues, even sometimes in that conversation, did you really want to bring that forward? Do you really want to report that? So it's so challenging, as we said earlier, when it comes to such a broad spectrum, is that now reporting it. There's these larger systemic issues when you start looking at, will I be believed? Our justice system was not really based on something as nuanced as sexual violence or gender-based violence. It was very much based on property. Think about it. Our laws are based on property. I own something, you take it from me, I come after you, right? You hurt me, my physical being, now you have assaulted, right? But our laws are not really made for this kind of nuanced. When it comes to then some of those systemic barriers, then what you're looking at is, does this justice system adequately address the issues that are here? The way we gather information and evidence is very different than how the brain processes memories during a traumatic event. You might go through a police interview of who, what, where, when, why, when your brain is processing it in a very different way because we have our flight responses kicking in. That you've also got a fragmented system because not our systems were built in silos. So when you're talking about somebody who needs help on an emotional level, a physical level, and think of somebody who now has to interact with victim services, sexual assault centers, the police, the hospital, the lawyers, their lawyers, the defendants, the crime prosecutors. It can be incredibly overwhelming. All the system around it. It's very overwhelming. And a lot of individuals say that actually the act of reporting and going through the justice system is just as traumatizing, if not more traumatizing than the incident itself.
Absolutely. That is such a good point because what the victims imagine that they go through itself prevents them from even opening up that conversation because at the end of the day, that is what feels secure and safe for them. And now if you're like, okay, if I report this and it's going to shake up my life, get everyone in trouble, cost me a lot of money, I'm not going to do it. I won't do it. I'd rather stay in my safe bubble. And it's the devil that I know versus the devil that I don't.
Too much, because if you think about it, is that it always baffles me when people are like, oh, just doing it for attention. It's on what earth would you want to bring this kind of attention to yourself?
I couldn't agree more. And I'm going to throw out a very touchy term, which is victim blaming. Something that you said that really brought that forth is people say all the time, do you really want to bring that forward? Do you really want to get yourself through all of that? Mm-hmm. And that really deters people. But what drives me really bonkers is that, and that's where the Me Too movement really started. Women felt powerless, that they didn't feel like coming forward because no matter what, you lose. Your skirt was too short. You asked for it. You flirted too much. Can you elaborate on that? Because that just fires me up.
I don't understand how you can tell somebody that your bike was stolen, your car was broken into, and they take you at face value. They don't ask you, where did you park your car? Did you leave the keys in the car? They take it as face value. But when you start talking about sexual violence or gender-based violence, it's what did you think was going to happen? What were you wearing? Were you drinking?
Yes,
wow,
that's a big one.
Were you sending mixed signals? It's insane because you turn it back onto the victim. One of the things that I did before starting VESTA was that I sat through trials. I went to court and I looked at the dockets and I was like, okay, if there's a sexual assault trial going on. And I was very fortunate because I had Crown prosecutors that would let me in. And I had one particular judge who let me into chambers during the session so that I could understand it from the judge's perspective, what was happening in court.
Neat. Okay.
Boggling to me because I was infuriated. The poor girl was 24 years old. She was this tiny girl. The man accused of assaulting her was this big 6-foot-something large man. She reported it within 5 hours of it happening. They were strangers to each other. There was physical evidence. And I listened to that lawyer cross-examine her for 4 hours. And I was enraged. That woman is my hero. I don't know how she survived 4 hours of somebody calling her names and essentially telling her that it was her fault because she went to a party. What did she think would happen? Dressed as, and the thing is, she was there actually working. So it wasn't like to what she was wearing either. It was her quote unquote uniform that happened to be very revealing, but somehow it was her fault. And it just boggles my mind when people do that. I was flabbergasted and I couldn't understand how this could possibly happen.
It's situations like that that makes me crazy on so many different levels. The first level is you're already made to feel shame even before you reported it.
Yes.
You already are like, I don't know, the normalizing context is that it probably didn't mean anything. It didn't land that way, or he probably didn't mean that. So you're already inhibited from reporting something that could be very psychologically damaging internally for you. And then on top of that, when you do report it, you go through this entire system that then just makes you feel even worse. That's crazy. That's craziness to me.
Yes.
Going back to this being triggering for you when you started VESTA, you had all this trigger, pent-up energy that you wanted to make change. This is a two-part question. So part one is, how did you start VESTA and how did it start? And the second part was immersing yourself in all of these cases even more triggering for you, or was it healing to go through that you weren't alone in this process?
So maybe I'll answer the second question first, because the answer is both, in the sense of being immersed in it at first brought up even more emotions and it was even more challenging. But it also, I think, helped me feel that I wasn't alone, also contextualizing it, understanding it. Because for me, and I think for a lot of individuals, is that you wonder and think, first of all, why me? What did this happen? What did I do? A lot of it is personal blaming. right? That's what's so horrible about victim blaming, is because somebody's reinforcing the negative connotations that are already going on in your head. And so I was already reinforced. And then when I realized that, I was like, oh, I wasn't at fault here. I did nothing wrong. And so it helped me heal, because I can remove those layers and all those years of shame and guilt and not talking about it, not processing. So it helped remove that. It's been both triggering, like I said, certain things enrage me and I can't even have a coherent conversation about, and honestly, I haven't done, I think as when we first met, I said, okay, I'm digging my toe back into doing podcasts, because there was a period of time where I was like, I can't talk coherently about this. I become so angry and it becomes so emotional that I can't have an articulate conversation about what it is that we're doing and how I feel about it. So that answers the second part. I guess it's been both triggering as well as healing. I started because I really first wanted to do some research. I guess it goes back to my little nerdy beginnings. And I also realized that my experience was not universal. And I really had to understand what was happening in the world. And I just didn't want it to be like getting information from the news, right? And I didn't want to look at it and be something that was just performative. And so I started with research. And by research, as I started talking to anybody that would listen to me, that I would interview, and it started with individuals through word of mouth. And like I said, it was before Me Too. So I started with every little coffee shop in and around Toronto, the quietest corner. I was told very early on that this was a human problem with a human solution. It was really an awareness problem and an education problem. That we really didn't have a reporting problem, even though the reporting numbers were so low, because obviously people don't want to.
Yeah.
Then Me Too happened. And I was like, I can't get more aware. Like you I couldn't have created that. Well, that blasted that whole thing out of the water, where it said this was an awareness and an education problem. Then I started talking to not just survivors themselves that had gone through sexual violence. Then I also wanted to understand it. I got into another like incubator space that was really focused on legal technology. And so through them, that's how I started going through the court system. So that's when I started getting connected to lawyers and crime prosecutors and judges. I also started talking to sexual assault centers and victim services. And so I wanted to understand it from a 360-degree view, because I thought, if we are talking about a systemic issue, how do we then have this conversation about helping individuals but navigate and move through the system in the way that it currently exists? A lot of information out there, and as more and more people becoming aware of it, but I wanted something action-oriented. I also started talking to law enforcement, because then I started looking at started coming together. So the one thing I realized is that I started working with organizations like the Ontario Coalition of Rape Crisis Centers, invited me to some of their meetings. So I would go and say, I'm looking to build this application. I want to help survivors increase reporting and access to justice and access to support. What do I need to know? So they helped me put together focus groups. So put together focus groups across the province with a diverse collection of survivors, ranging from 18 to 80 years old and from different demographics and groups. What I found out through there was that if there was two things that came up from some of those groups, was one, that everybody turned to the internet before disclosing to someone. And the other thing was that they wanted to know if there was a way for them to remain anonymous, because they didn't want it to happen to somebody else, and they didn't necessarily want justice for themselves. When I started talking to law enforcement, what I started to realize is they couldn't do anything with an anonymous report. So I started looking at, what are their alternative ways of reporting? And so what I stumbled across was actually a protocol that got developed here in Ontario. I don't know if you remember, but it was a protocol that came out of a recommendation of the Paul Bernardo case. So there was this protocol that got developed, which was called third-party reporting, where it allows an individual to go to what they call a trusted intermediary. So in this center, like an organized, that's a center that was trusted by both the survivor as well as from law enforcement. That person and that organization would hold the identity of that individual. So that they could pass along the information. Now, it was seen as an option of last resort and simply for collecting information, statistical information. But I thought, so there is an alternative way. Then I started talking to researchers in Australia and the UK, and I started realizing that there was something called restrictive reporting in the United States military. There's alternative reporting options in Australia. So I'm like, there are mechanisms. So when I started putting these pieces together and say, okay, hold on a sec. So people want to be able to report anonymously. And the US statistics came out is that if you gave individuals the option to report anonymously, 15% actually came forward and filed a formal complaint. And I was like, well, we jumped from 5% to 15 just by giving them this option. That's important. That's actionable. I also realized that first conversation was so important. So how do we disrupt that first conversation? So it was like, we have to be online. So it was like, we have to meet people where they are. And where are they going? Online. And we're not talking just young people. Yes, those 18 to 24 to 35, obviously going online, but even some older individuals were also going online. Because the first thing you're doing is looking for information because I'm sorry, unless it's an actual stranger danger, and more often it's not, it's usually somebody you know. And actually the individuals who use our app, 67.7% who use it are people in known and named offenders.
No, they know them, they're family, they're a friend, they're an associate, they're a coworker, they're a first date, a second date. Wow.
So it was, okay, so there are alternative ways. Now we have to be online. We also have to wrap services around them because we realized that part of it was this siloed in trying to understand information. People are turning online, but it's trying to find information. You want to know, first of all, what happened. Because honestly, unless you're in law enforcement or work in this, usually it's a feeling. Ew, that felt icky. There was something wrong about that. So first it's a feeling is trying to understand, or why don't I feel this way? Or I'm on my way to the hospital because somehow I don't feel well. Something has happened. I woke up and I'm in a strange place in a stranger's house. I don't remember anything. So a lot of people were turning online for information, just even understanding and classifying what had happened to them. Once they got past that step, they wanted to understand, what are my rights? What is the next step? How do I go about doing that? But as you try to find that information, and some people just want to move on and say, okay, how do I heal from this? Or how do I find services? Or how do I talk to somebody, but anonymously? So it's okay. So we have to pull together all this information and put it together. We have to be online. We have to be where they are. It can't be an app because no one wanted it on their phone. Heaven forbid they were in an abusive relationship. No one wanted their spouse to find it on their phone. So it had to be
fair enough.
So then it was like, then how do we get police? So it's like, then we have to have a way to turn this around. It has to come to them. So all these pieces came together over about 2.5, 3 years of research and focus groups. What ended up coming about was a web application and a platform that allows individuals to document their experience in a trauma-informed manner because we merged forensic interviewing with therapeutic interviewing. So they're able to document their experience, log and store any kind of social media, online content, anything that they've got relationships, social media handles, any information, voice notes, videos, and attach it and save it in a secure cloud-based system. They can then access resources online or in person or crisis chat. So we connected, we put together over 90 resources, online resources where individuals can read and download. But because we were partnering with sexual assault centers, is that then they can connect directly to in-person services. And if they wanted crisis chats, some of those already exist, and we connected it without leaving the app. It just pops up and there's a person on the other end who's ready to chat. And for those individuals that wanted to connect to police, then and only then did we ask them if they were willing to release their names and contact information. If they did, then they would proceed to connect to police. And because we had a police partner, so in 2019, we launched this. In 2020 or 2021 is when we went live in Kingston. We found pilot partners with the Kingston Police and the Sexual Assault Center pilot this. Because it's one thing if you build technology, but will people use it? Will people trust it? And because we were partnered with them, what happened was that it allowed individuals in the Kingston area that if they wanted to connect with law enforcement, Kingston detectives would contact that individual, phone or email the way they preferred. And so that first connection, that first contact to police was a soft, or the way it was described to me by someone was a kinder, gentler way to connect with law enforcement.
And they're not just breaking down your door, arresting the person that you know, especially. And a lot of victims, they just want options and they want to be educated around this topic.
Yes, and they want to be believed. It was interesting because some of our research came up and said that actually over 74% of individuals, when asked if they had a positive or negative experience reporting to law enforcement. What was a determining factor was the first interaction with law enforcement, not whether or not charges were late. It was actually that first conversation and that first interaction. If we can make that first interaction a more positive experience, we're already leaps and bounds ahead of where we were before. The whole thing was about incremental improvements and helping individuals access services and make informed decisions.
Yes. That's the meeting where they are part. Now, let me ask you this, Lucrezia. So if I am a victim, I'm going through this platform, which is brilliant, by the way. I think that connecting people to resources and just making them feel safe, that a platform like this was built so that people can safely output something that they're feeling, but they're not sure, I think is important work and important to have. Kudos to you for idealizing it, finding creative ways, pushing back on the status quo that, oh, okay, people aren't just going to report it, then forget about it, right? You dug and you found creative ways to have intermediary places for people to be able to make that connection. But say, for example, I'm a victim, I'm going through the platform, I'm filling out the information. Do you have stats on the fall off rate with, do you want to make this an official report? Does that stop people in their tracks? Or are they like, no, I'm off. Buy that, shut down my profile. I'm not here for it. I don't want any part of this. I'm gone.
It was actually really challenging when we went to design it, was that how do we design it in a way that's welcoming for individuals that check it out, scope it out, go back and forth and make a decision whether or not they want to come forward. One of the biggest challenges we found is technology does a great job of follow a path, right? And streamlining a process. This was, in a weird way, it was like, how do you choose your own adventure? And so it wasn't about forcing people down a certain path. Now, we took a certain path because it was based on some of the research that was, to make it look as simple as it does, it actually took tons of research. There was researchers out of the UK that sent me a Google Drive worth of their research, like memories and how memories get encoded and how we process and how we ask questions. And so there was a lot of work behind the scenes. So there is an actual flow and process to the way the questions are asked. But to your question is that it is still soft and gentle. It's all images so that to help evoke memories, but without creating trauma. And also because we also talked to Crown prosecutors, we also wanted to make sure we weren't leading them down a path that then it was like the app told me. And it's very nuanced in that way. So to your point, yes, absolutely. The number of individuals that kind of jumped in and went onto the app, and then the individuals that actually went to the end and filed like reports, there is definitely a drop off, and they dropped off all along the way. So some individuals literally got to the first page and was like, no, I'm out. Even though it was like, record your information, report, or just seek out information. And that's okay, because we allowed them to go through the whole process completely anonymously and confidentially. We did not create user profiles. We didn't have to create any kind of, or leave any information of yours behind to get all the way to the end. So unless you said, yes, I want to connect to law enforcement, or yes, I want a counselor to call me, only then, if you toggled yes, because the default was no, and the default is anonymous, only if you toggle yes, then are you asked to provide your contact information.
I see, because at that point, you're just storing information and they can make that choice. So it empowers them to be able to have agency in their experience as well. This is honestly such fascinating work. And I'm sure that there's so much psychology. And I guess a question that I had for you is that in working with the lawyers, the Crown prosecutors, and law enforcement, what was really surprising to you about working with people in that position of power in our system? What did you learn from that experience?
Goodness, where to start? I realized that everything else, it's individuals and it's people. And also, when I was also starting this, it was a period of time where law enforcement was under a lot of scrutiny because of a Globe and Mail expose, a multi-month, actually, I think it was like an 18-month investigation that was called the Unfounded series. It was incredible. If you ever want to do some reading about it, it was Robin Doolittle from the Globe and Mail. And I think it was an 18-month reporting where she went through a Freedom of Information Act and went through and found how many cases were classified as unfounded. And that means individuals, many of them women, came forward to file some kind of sexual violence complaint and reported to the police were deemed unfounded or no crime had been committed. And so when I'm starting this, it was just coming off that, right? It had just made news. So there was a lot of apprehension and there was also a lot of defensiveness, if you will, within this sector. And what I realized was like everything else, there was a system that's in place that individuals are enforcing, but individually, there was a lot of people who really cared. And so it was trying to navigate that space. And I'm not saying everybody did. I'll be honest. It's not like everybody thought this was a great endeavor. I got more no's and more, are you crazy? Not just no's. It was like, why? Just bafflement from individuals and just did not understand what I was trying to do. So working with those was really about trying to find then. And sometimes people just didn't understand whether they were lawyers, whether they was law enforcement, whether it was crime prosecutors. It was just like, we have a system. Why do you have to do this? And the system has so many moving parts and it's so challenging and daunting that sometimes it was, how do I say this? It's just, they almost put up more barriers in front because yes, but did you consider this? Yes, but did you consider that? And all I think about was, okay, but where can I put the drop in the ocean? Change the whole system. And I can't, it's not within my scope of purview and I'm just one person and one organization. I can't change the whole system. But where can I put my stake in the ground or where can I drop that pebble? Drop a pebble in a body of water and it ripples. It was really trying to understand is where can I put that drop? Who was the person that was going to move me to the next person? Who was the one that was going to move me to the next? So for example, how did we finally get to pilot this? That's what I realized. I needed a real world application because for 3 years or so, I just talked about the potential for it. So what guardrails I can put around it? How can I get in front of a chief of police that was willing to test this out? And it took time, but I found the chief of police that was willing to test this. And it's okay, we're going to do a small pilot. But then the concern was, oh my God, we put it online. But then we can get bombarded from all over the country or all over the world. Now we've realized that our actual website has had hits from over 150 countries, but our app is only accessible through our partner website. So we specifically kept it a very small pilot. So when specifically my launch Zoom, obviously because it was during COVID, had 8 people on it. Not 8 people from 8 different organizations, 8 people from 3 organizations. It was about, first of all, can we make it so that if you build it, will people use it? It was about then finding those individuals that would remove those barriers and say, okay, let's test it here. And then, okay, now let's test it. Let's see, how do we move forward? How do we now make it better?
Yeah.
I'm not going to lie. When some of those champions moved on or moved to different roles or moved to different departments, it really stumbled because it's really something that requires champions at every stage.
And you needed to forge new relationships once people moved on.
Exactly.
And also something that's really challenging in hearing you just talk about that too, is that they're constantly in an industry and a field where the cases that they see, what they hear is normalized. That's probably where you got some of that resistance too, is that they're like, why are you changing this? This is just, we get so many reports a day. We're just trying to move through our job. So that's another layer of resistance to changing the system.
It wasn't so much we get so many reports and it was normalized. It was more about a lot of actual cases get dropped in the sense of the individual doesn't want to move forward. They have a conversation with law enforcement. They go forward. They're given some options and there are individuals and a large number of them, you know, whether it's, okay, we look through the evidence, we look through this and we don't think this is prosecutable. We're not sure if there's enough evidence or yes, there may be, but we need to move forward. And this is what the justice system looks like. And this is what you need to be prepared for the next year, 2, 3 years of going through the system. I met some incredibly passionate law enforcement officers that were enraged by things that were happening in the system.
Okay.
Not necessarily the challenge. It was that there was all these kind of silos, right? And sometimes we're not just talking about it from law enforcement, there's also the other side of it where there's all these organizations and where do individuals go to get help? You go to police to file a complaint and it's a criminal investigation.
Mhm.
The police officer's job isn't to really hold your hand or help you process the trauma. So then there's that whole kind of healing side of it, whether there was physical healing, if there was physical injuries and there's hospitals involved, whether now there's psychological industries and trauma, where now you're looking at counseling and services. And so there's
Yeah.
also that whole segment. So part of it is that it's so siloed and there's so many barriers between all of them. And everybody's so worried about protecting survivor privacy, which is incredibly
Mhm.
important. But that means that then they're not talking to each other. And so what ends up
Right.
happening is the individual now is always having to repeat their story over and
Yes.
over again. Because they're
Yeah.
like, oh, I'm looking for help from this organization. Oh, I have to repeat what happened. And oh, I have to go through sessions. And oh, I have to talk to someone else. So
And you're re-experiencing that trauma every single time.
absolutely. Going back to your original question about what are some of those systemic barriers, this is an example of all those systemic barriers.
The silos and the organizations. And is that something VESTA is trying to target? Is that if the information, whether they come out with their identity or not, that information is housed in one place so that if one organization needs the information, they can technically withdraw it from VESTA and supply it to this organization and then another one if they need it? Is that something that VESTA aims to change?
Not quite. What we were trying to do, though, is the way we were looking at breaking down some of those systemic barriers actually wasn't through technology. Yes, the information was housed in one place, and yes, it was there. But we realized that technology is a tool. It's not a solution in and of itself.
Yes.
So what we did was, because we had this pilot period and we had pilot partners, is we would bring them together on a regular basis, as in bi-weekly. So that means there would be representatives of the police services, there'd be representatives of the sexual assault center, and us on calls every couple of weeks discussing how many reports were coming in. And even if it was something as simple as, hey, how do I access this information? I don't understand what I'm looking at in the dashboard. But the point is that when you're talking to somebody who's usually gay, and now you're finding yourself on a Zoom every 2 weeks, and all of a sudden you're no longer Cindy, let's say the law enforcement or the police officer, you're Cindy, who I'm going to talk to on Wednesday. So now I'd be more open and more able to have this conversation with you and be like, hey, Cindy, we have a conversation offline. There's been a particularly challenging case, or we're having some issues that are coming in. We're seeing a rise in our office. Are you seeing a rise? You didn't have to reveal any confidences or break anybody confidentiality. But the thing was, once you start seeing Cindy every 2 weeks, it becomes harder to point fingers and say it's all her fault and all our organization's fault. So it was about, how do we bring the organizations together, not just through the actual technology itself that, yes, they had access to, again, but it was always permission-based. They would never have access to any information. If that individual user and survivor who used the app did not want that information shared, it was never shared.
Yeah, their safety and their trust is always number one. And the intention is always for them to direct them to resources that they needed versus the report element of it, right?
Exactly. It was for them to choose.
Okay.
So if they decided halfway through, they're like, no, you know what? I need to talk to somebody. And there was like, I want to have a crisis chat. Then there was the option for the crisis chat line to pop up.
So making it accessible, it's like a choose your own adventure where they plug in the information without having leading questions, but really just seeing what resources that they needed. Let's talk about technology a little bit. Is that something where you had already talked about it being a human problem, and now with the rise of tech and AI and even cybersecurity, when people are putting in their information, whether it's anonymous, whether it's not, how do you deal with technology? How do you juggle the two?
Yeah, that's a big part of it. And also what I was looking at the beginning is that really from the very beginning, it was about, how do we protect people's privacy and allow them to stay anonymous if they want to. And so it really was really early on working with privacy experts. And so we looked at it, like there's this concept called privacy by design, right? So it's really about putting the person's individual needs at the center of it and making sure you're protecting their privacy from the very beginning. And something as simple as, without going into all the elements, I think there's something like 9 or 10 elements of it that goes into it. One of the ones that was the most important for me is, for example, you ask the absolute least amount of information from that individual necessary. There's this concept of least amount of information. For example, when you start talking to engineers or computer scientists and you start talking about how do you protect it? And I can go into and tell you how we encrypt the data all the way down to the field level, what that encryption level is. It's 200. I can tell you all the technical specs of it and tell you that we use the same amount of technology that banks use to protect banking information and hospitals use to protect hospital information. But more importantly, I'm not asking you your name. I'm not storing your name. I don't need your name. It's about when you're building technology, do I need your name for the app to work? And we had threat assessments done, right? So have somebody come in and do an assessment saying, where are we vulnerable? How do we fix this? So you have somebody literally test your system for weaknesses so you can address them before anything ever happens. So all of that absolutely is in play and in place. But more importantly, I think it's the least amount.
Yeah.
Don't collect it. Don't store it if you don't need it.
Absolutely. And that's smart. And I think that's a differentiating factor.
When you're trying to build technology to have a really seamless user experience, one of the things is about tracking information and making sure then that individual has the seamless experience. So they go back in and every information's already right. You have to make trade-offs. Are you trying to protect someone's privacy? Or are you trying to give them a seamless experience? And so for me, I default, and every time I look at building in any kind of new features, I default to privacy. Sometimes that means the user experience isn't quite as seamless. To type in what happened, you're starting to save information, and then you just want to walk away. It's not a time system. I've seen other systems where it's got 30 minutes, there goes the timer, go. Cindy, everything that happened to you, 30 minutes, go. Stressful. So we built it in a way that you can save it and go back to it. Okay, I haven't created a profile for you because I don't want to track you. So how do I do this in a way that allows you to save your information? So we created a system where it's a combination of an encryption. The system encrypts it and informs and gives you an encryption key. So you need to store that key, but then we ask you to create a strong password. We don't save that password. We also recover that password because we have no identifying factors to tie it to. So in order for you to get back into your own record, you have to provide the encryption key that the system provided for you and the password that you created. Only that combination alone can unlock your report.
They don't want their husbands to find it. Or what if their abused partner stumbles upon it? That's going to put them in more risk, which is also what you're trying to prevent, right?
Absolutely. So because if they were to land on that page, they couldn't access that information without that password and that encryption key. So without those, they can't get in. And so you try to make it as secure as possible, but that means that if you lose that password, we can't help you retrieve.
That is really smart because it really sounds like you've thought about every different angle. Now, I want to take this back to a more broader audience and who in your database experiences this gender-based violence? How does it show up in everyday life that people may not even realize?
Because our pilot was very much around reporting to law enforcement, we were looking at, because when we started to build it, we built it for, as we said early on, gender-based violence, sexual assault is so broad. So it was like, okay, how do we start? And so the way we were defining it was a criminal act. So we were defining it based on a criminal and an individual in a report to law enforcement. When we first built it, we thought we built it for sexual assault. It wasn't about domestic violence. It was about somebody who wants to go to a criminal act and report it to law enforcement. But more and more was individuals then who, what we thought was it was going to be individuals that didn't necessarily have a relationship with somebody and that they were reporting an assault. What ended up happening instead was over time, what we realized that individuals that were using our app, because we asked them, we take them through and ask them if they know their offender. And it's up to them if they want to disclose the name of that offender. And we realized that 67.7% of individuals that use our application have known and named offenders. So it wasn't about strangers. It was actually individuals who they know or are in a relationship with.
Interesting. And so based on that research, you had started to pilot. It was for people who had committed a crime. So now where VESTA is, who is the ideal people that then come onto the platform?
I don't know if I would say ideal. Like, it's so challenging, right? When you're thinking about the language, is that actually right now we're looking at going deeper instead of broader. So we're really lucky. We're at this opportunity right now where we have an opportunity to expand VESTA. And I started thinking about it and I went, I can take it as is and I can just expand it geographically to other areas.
Yeah.
We also started to realize that we have so many findings from the last, like I said, we launched in 2021 and then in 2022, a university came on board. So then it was like, we also got to see reporting to universities. How did that change? Did the demographics change, right? When we got younger people into the system. And so what I realized was that right now, I actually want to go broader and deeper. And so I started talking to organizations. I was actually at an event in November. And I was talking about the way we talk about sexual assault and gender violence. We need to move it away from it being an individual or a family-based problem, but rather to a public health and safety. And so I was addressing a hospital and it was in a healthcare kind of setting. And I had individuals come up to me after the talk and kind of challenge me and say, this is great. And as a pilot, you saw that people will use technology, but could it help me and could it help my group? And what individuals that were coming to me were individuals that were recent newcomers to the country and refugee or non-status individuals, particularly women. And so I started thinking about that and some of other research and other individuals that had come back to me in the past as we were doing this pilot, what we started to realize something around 2013 is that when we started getting feedback, what we realized was individuals were walking into their counseling sessions asking for help with their VESTA report. And what we realized was they weren't asking for like, how do I fill out the report? It wasn't the tech they had questions about. They had questions about how do they contextualize it within the broader, let's say, access to justice or healing journey. Like, where did it fit? And I realized that that is so individual and it's so personal to every single person. And you can't solve that with technology alone. And some of the feedback we'd gotten back is that we had to have some kind of like human mediation in there. And I thought, again, I understand how you have this mix of tech and human. So how do we then combine those services? But going back to what we talked about before was there's so many siloed systems right now. There's so many organizations, nonprofits, charity work. People are doing advocacy work. People are doing frontline support work. People that are doing legal clinics. There's all these organizations. And then there's a whole justice system that are, oh, I don't want to build another silo. Now, I can't go into too many details about it, but I'm broadening the horizon, really talking to other organizations that already have embedded services where they're helping individuals navigate different products and different services in our healthcare systems and in this sector as well. So we're talking about broadening the scope of VESTA into different communities and working with different organizations so that we can embed VESTA in already existing organizations that are already servicing very vulnerable populations and understand the nuances. And they already have, if you will, like a case management where they're helping individuals one-on-one. And so they have those experiences and that connections already, and they have that trust. How could we help support them with this technology to help them then navigate the space and for those individuals that are looking to access justice?
Very powerful. And it's true, they already have the trust as well as they know how to communicate with that subsegment. If it's newcomers, if it's whatever it is, they're already halfway in. You're just providing an additional tool. That's really exciting, Lucrezia. I think that is very meaningful work that goes deeper and you have the opportunity to go broader. It's just really where you want to put your foot on the pedal now, right?
Exactly.
Are you able to share some success stories or what are some of the triumphs being in a very hard industry? You've built an incredible beast, but it's very challenging. What are some of the success stories that just keep it going for you?
Oh my goodness. Yeah. That's the thing it's hard sometimes because we have so much anonymity built into the system. Sometimes I'm like, is this helping? And I want to make sure that we give individuals that option. But sometimes what I get feedback, especially when it comes in through our partners, and I've gotten some feedback that's, this is amazing. We've needed this for so long. The words that I've heard, I think I used it earlier. Somebody came back and said, I really like this kinder, gentler connection. And I really appreciate that. And so when I get that kind of feedback, it's just, oh, okay, we did something good. I think the first time I found out that charges were laid on a report that came in through our system, I did a little song and dance and celebrated. Even early on, like our research said, we'd get 100 anonymous reports before we'd ever get our first report to police. And that didn't happen. Actually, within 10 days, we had our first report to police. It was like, oh my God, people are actually using this. Those things keep me going. And so it's just, there's so much more work to do. There's so much further to go. But when I get those nuggets of information, I'm like, yes, it's helping.
Yeah. Amazing. And do you know how many new like survivors fill out a profile on a month? Like, do you have a good trend or an average with that?
Yeah. Remember, they don't fill out a profile. So let's be clear. I just want to make sure. But as individuals that access, it really varies. And we noticed that there's almost like a seasonality to it. And it was interesting because I was told early on that I was shocked by this. And I didn't realize that there was a seasonality to when individuals report. Like there was, we talk a lot about the beginning of, let's say, the school year, right? It's actually been called the red zone, where the report right then. Sometimes what you'll see is a surge actually just before the holidays when term is over. And then it'll be like, now I can deal with it. Also had some stats early on that before we launched it, when I've been doing some research, is that individuals who do come forward, it takes them about 11 months from the time an incident happens to when they complete their first report or actually come forward. And it's really hard because at that point, police are investigating a historical crime. And what we realized is that in the first few months, we started to realize that individuals actually were entering into the system, started to complete reports within 4 months. It still wasn't immediate, but we dropped from 11 months to 4 months. So all these are wins. We do know that there are drop-offs. And I've talked to also some researchers, and it's actually another path that I'm exploring. One of the biggest challenges here is that there's really a lack of data around individuals that aren't coming forward. Right? So we've mentioned it more than once during this podcast. Less than 5% of individuals are coming forward. When you look for information, and I don't know if you found this, but even if you go on Statistics Canada, the UN Women, you go to all these international organizations, they will always tell you what the estimated numbers are. And the reason for that is we really start counting information or individuals when they present somewhere. So when someone presents at a police station, when someone presents at a hospital, when someone presents at a sexual assault center, when someone presents somewhere seeking some kind of help or support. We know that's an average of about 5%. But what about the 95 that don't? Because we've got information on our website, what we found is that almost as a byproduct of what we were building is that we actually have behavior-based data of individuals' anonymous information, of individuals of what they're doing before they report. And we also know that there are drop-offs. I can tell you that there was a period of time where our website was getting something like 2,000 to 3,000 hits a month when we first started, and 100 were hitting the app. So you can already see that percentage go down, right?
Yes.
50,000 individuals access our website, but a fraction of that went to the app. And as I started talking to academics and researchers, is there any value in this information? You're the first ones we know that are actually tracking this.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that, is there a way? And again, we want to be careful if we're going to do something and go down this path. I'm talking to then privacy experts and security experts to understand if we wanted to go deep and down this path and say, can we look at it from this kind of perspective? It'd be incredibly valuable to get some insight into what I call the iceberg, right? See the tip of the iceberg. So can we do it in a way that is safe, that individuals' privacy, that we can still gather information that would be valuable to the sector?
Yeah.
to allocate resources, to allocate budget, not data-based decisions and saying we have this gap. Right now, I'll give you an example. Talking to a sensual assault center that has a limited amount of counselors available. Individuals are seeking either group counseling or one-on-one counseling, and their wait list. That's how they know there's a bigger demand, because they have a wait list that's longer than what they can provide. They are afraid of that, because some people are like, we have 1,000 people on our wait list, and already that weighs on them because they have 1,000 people that are already waiting, let's say 5 months, 10 months, a year for support. And they're like, wait a minute, you tell me that there's actually 10,000 people that need my help? People don't want to know that. Others that like government agencies and organizations are like, wait a minute, but if you can give me that information, and isn't that powerful to say we need more resources?
So the data can support systemic decisions and systemic changes and really make impact at that level, right?
Exactly. Do that in a way that protects individuals' privacy, right? So that's also one of the projects that I'm working on, and understanding who and how would we navigate something like that.
Oh, Lucrezia, you are doing such important work, and I can feel your passion, and I'm there with you every step of the way. You are making systemic change, and you should be so proud of yourself. I usually like to do some get to know your CEOs, because we really want to get to know you as well. What's a song that lifts your mood?
Oh my goodness, it depends on my mood, but I think if I'm about to give like a speech or go out on stage or something, get my blood going, it's a World Cup. I think it was Ricky Martin's La Copa de la Vida, and it's actually about going out and winning. But it's in Spanish, and I'm like goals and winning and shooting for that win. So
yes,
gets my blood flowing every single time.
I love that.
Yeah.
And what's one word that describes your journey? I'm sure there are so many words.
Oh my God, one word that describes my journey. Is there a word that's like bumpy?
I can probably see why, right? So that is a very good and very easy to understand word. So I like that. What is your favorite way to unwind after a long day?
I think actually it's just walking the dog. A bit of like physical exercise, outdoor. Like I need to be outside. So my favorite way to unwind is I need to be near water. Ideally, I'd be near an ocean, but I live in Toronto. So there's no ocean. The lake is also not exactly right around the corner either. I think at the end of the day, especially if I'm having a hard day, I just grab the dog and be like, let's go outside and let's go for a walk. And sometimes just seeing her run and play right now in the snow just can't help but make me smile.
And fun fact for everyone too, Lucrezia and I both adopted dogs from the same organization that rescues dogs from Korean meat markets. Shout out to Free Korean Dogs. They do amazing things. Their dogs are the best. They're just my hearts, and I'm sure they're yours too, right?
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Lucrezia. You have shared so much educational information, and it's a hard topic, but I do think it's something that's really important to talk about. So we're going to share a whole bunch of resources in our show notes following the show. You can find the website is vestasit.com, as well as we're going to have some resource links and resource libraries. You can find Lucrezia on LinkedIn. I have that here. Perfect. And you can connect, ask any questions. And we are so looking forward to what it is that you're going to build in the future, because I think this is such important work.
Thank you. And thanks so much for having me. It's a hard topic, and I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to talk about it, but also just to casually have a conversation. Because you know what? If we're afraid to talk about it, we're never going to tackle it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's one of those things where I think a lot of people don't know how to talk about it, or they just think that there's so much shame attached to it. So we got to break through that barrier.
Agreed.
Thank you, Lucrezia. It was such an honor to have you on the show.
Thank you so much.
I'm so glad you joined us today for the Fearless Entrepreneurs podcast. If this episode resonated with you, share it with a friend or someone who could use a little inspiration. You can always reach me, your host, Cindy Chang, directly on Instagram or Spotify DM. I love hearing from you. Don't forget to hit subscribe and leave a review. It truly means the world to me. Until next time, stay fearless.